The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to Reproaction's Act and Learn webinar for the month of December 2020. It feels great to say the last month in 2020. Today's topic is one near and dear to our hearts, co-leadership, building and nurturing powerful partnerships. So first we'll introduce your hosts. First voice you're hearing is that woman on the left, Erin Matson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of Reproaction. I'm based in Arlington, Virginia, and I am Erin to the Max on Twitter.
And I am Pamela Merritt. I'm the woman on the right. And my pronouns are she and her. I am based in St. Louis, Missouri, and you can follow me on Twitter at SharkFoo. So the agenda for today is going to be an introduction of Reproaction to people who are new to the organization. I'm going to give a brief overview of some leadership models, and then we're going to have our discussion. So for folks who are new, Erin and I have been in co-leadership since we co-founded Reproaction in 2015. So we have a lot to talk about. And then after the discussion, we'll go through some next steps, and then there will be time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. If you have questions throughout our discussion, please drop them into the question tab on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end of the webinar. So Reproaction leads bold, direct action to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. We are proud of our left flank analysis, our willingness to hold folks on all sides accountable, whether they identify as allies or the opposition, and our commitment to nonviolent direct action. When we think about leadership, I think a lot of folks think about it in terms of, somebody at the front of an invading or conquering army who is leading one group of people and just automatically has the great plan. But there are so many different ways to look and to put leadership together. And I think one of the best first steps when thinking through a leadership model is to acknowledge that that leadership comes in many forms. So co-leadership is defined as two or more people equally sharing power and influence over a company, an organization, or a project. And so I was always fascinated by the idea of having a group of 3 or 4 people, or all coming together and trying to make decisions. That co-leadership model comes together in a way that actually benefits, or should come together rather, in a way that actually benefits the organization and the mission, and most importantly, the community that you serve. So everybody has a personal leadership style. And Erin and I both have had the privilege of going through the Rockwood Leadership Institute's Art of Leadership, and then we were both fellows, Erin most recently last year, and I in 2017, with their reproductive health, health rights and justice fellowship, which really is a deep dive in personal leadership and how to identify and nurture your personal leadership stance. I can't recommend Rockwood strongly enough. And I also recommend that people invest, however possible, in finding out what your personal leadership style is. It's really connected to that first bullet point, because you can't stand in co-leadership with somebody if you're not sure how you lead and why you lead. And then I also think it's important to note that leadership is a practice worth nurturing. So it isn't something that you get trained in and you just do. It isn't something that begins one way with an organization and doesn't ever change. Leadership, in order to be effective, needs to be adaptive and also needs to be nurtured. So you have to practice that inner work, practice, evaluating and exploring your leadership stance, so that your leadership stays strong. And then finally, I want to make a note that it's important, however you put leadership together, either as a single leader, as co-leadership with two leaders, or multiple people coming together and equally sharing power. However you approach that, or however you build that, you should approach it with honesty, self-awareness, and courageous communication. I want to make note that I didn't say perfection, because though we strive towards excellence, we are all human. But to be honest, to be aware and courageous in your communication, all of those are necessary in order to have strong co-leadership, and certainly to build relationships that are impactful and fulfilling. And with that, let's go and get started on our discussion of co-leadership. Erin Matson, I will ask the first discussion question. So why did we found Reproaction using a co-leadership model?
Well, thank you, Pamela, and I'm delighted to have this discussion with you today, and really excited by the enthusiasm of others for this topic. And I just want to pause and say here that this is one of the questions that Pamela and I consistently get through this 5-year journey together is, what's a co-directorship model look like? How do you make that work? So really excited to share that with you today. I also ask for your patience with a few unusual background noises. I am co-leading this organization, also managing virtual distance learning. And so it is what it is, with a few crash bang booms in the background, and I appreciate your patience on that. So I do have an answer for this on Pamela's question on why did we found Reproaction using a co-leadership model, but I think there's a first part of the story that Pamela tells much better than me. And so I'd like to start there. Pamela, I think this has something to do with an inbox. Does that jog something for you?
It does. So, many years ago, I had always, ever since, starting as a professional in the reproductive justice and health movement, I had heard of Erin Matson and her work in many spaces, and was very aware of her writing and her leadership. So what was interesting is that at the time in which Erin reached out via email, I was not the best person, still not great, but certainly then was really bad at checking my personal inbox, email inbox, to see, who had reached out. And for some reason, I think it was really just the goddess looking out for me. I was taking a break from a project and clicked on my Gmail, and there was Erin's name. And because, I hadn't been in a lot of communication with Erin, but I definitely knew that name. I was like, what does Erin Matson want? So I clicked on it, and it was just, it grabbed me. It was, this question of saying, do you have time? And I would appreciate some time to jump on the phone and talk through and hear your thoughts on where you think the reproductive health rights and justice movement is. If you think, what do you think it would be good to change? What do you think it's lacking? Do you think we're winning? And what do you think it would take if we're not to win? And I sat there for maybe 2 or 3 seconds and thought, this is going to be the longest phone call of Erin Matson's life. And then I replied and said, I would love to talk through and to share my thoughts. I have tons of thoughts on that. And so, we jumped on the line, and I think I knew within a few minutes that, that this was going to be a connection that was going to help me grow in how I viewed the broader movement. And then it really took off from there. But it really was just a matter of me opening that email, and I'm so glad I checked my inbox that day.
So thank you for that, Pamela. So back to your question of why did we found Reproaction using a co-leadership model? So very early on, when I first received seed money for what eventually became Reproaction, I knew that Pamela Merritt was one of the first people I wanted to talk to. I knew this because we didn't know each other well, but we had met in person at Take Root, a fantastic reproductive justice conference in Oklahoma. And I had admired her writing for a long time. We were connected on Facebook. And I'm just gonna say, Pamela is fiery and she leaves nothing to the imagination. And yet at the same time, she has this incredible tact about her. And I was able to read between the lines on a number of different posts that she'd made, and I believed that we had a number of important things to discuss. So I was really excited to have that first telephone conversation with her. And what I did was I convened a couple of sessions. Some people might consider them focus groups, but they were not focus groups. They were convening sessions of reproductive health rights and justice advocates around the country to talk about shaking up the movement and what we could do to shift from a losing posture to a winning posture. And when it became clear that there was, in fact, something that I had felt in my conversations, but indeed confirmed through this process, that there were a number of activists around the country who really wanted to see the movement fight harder and be bolder. And as that became clear that some sort of entity would be a good idea, I knew that co-leadership was the way to go. And I also knew very early on that Pamela Merritt was exactly who I wanted to do this with, but I did not want to scare her. So she attended one of those convening sessions. We kept in contact over the telephone, and after that first session, someone else who knew that I was very interested in a co-director model also confirmed just what I thought after the session, which was Pamela needs to be joint leading this, and I completely agreed, and so did my best to continue the conversation with her. I will say at the outset, one additional thought on co-leadership. I had seen the model work really well with direct action organizations specifically, and Reproaction was founded with a core competency in direct action. So I thought that was really important, and I also felt very strongly as a white woman in this movement that it was important not to follow a typical pattern of white women just grabbing power and going with this. I wanted to collaborate in true co-leadership. So that was why for me. Pamela, please add to this discussion here.
Oh goodness. So when I think about how I thought about the co-leadership model, my I really do think it was a matter of the conversations that you and I had before we really decided to take the leap. But so we, when Erin says that that we had several conversations and we kept in contact, we did, and then we sort of formalized it with saying, well, let's talk through some very specific things. And so we set up, I think it was 7, it might have been more, 1-hour conversations that we had that covered everything from leadership style to temperament to pet peeves to, how we approach risk, how we approach, um, personal responsibility, how we like to do direct actions. I loved it, and it was really both revealing, but also it was like the gift that keeps on giving, because I think we ironed out so many different things that a lot of folks are reluctant to go ahead and have introductory discussions about. And then also it made me feel very confident in whether or not my personal style of leadership and my work style would fit with Erin's. Um, and so from that, I just want to highlight that we both felt very strongly that this was an opportunity to build an organization that would really disrupt the common idea of what a reproductive health or rights or justice, but definitely reproductive justice organization looked like, how it was set up, and what the leadership looked like, and where it was doing work. So I was super excited to be a to have the opportunity to co-found a national organization and be able to stay rooted in the Midwest. That we both shared a commitment to investing, organizing, and energy in places that were not necessarily getting attention because they no longer had electoral significance. And I also thought it was super important that not only that we were demonstrating co-leadership, um, uh, in having that equal balance of power between, a Black woman and a white woman, but also that we were very intentionally shaking it up as far as where we were based, and that, having Erin be from the Midwest, but also having me located in the Midwest felt really, really important. And I still think it's super important. And it really is an unfortunately rare opportunity for people who are in the Midwest, which is such an important part of the reproductive rights fight regionally, to sit in leadership, in co-leadership, at a national organization. So I think that was a tremendous opportunity, but I was so excited that Erin was super excited about that opportunity as well. So the decision to sit in co-leadership was really deeply rooted in the fact that we saw the value in that. So thank you for that, Erin. I will take the next question. So one of the big things that a lot of people share about co-leadership, is leadership in general and co-leadership specifically, is how important communication is. And it's easy to say that communication is important, but what systems have we put in place to ensure open, respectful, and regular communication? You want to share some of those?
Sure. So first off, I would say none of this would be possible without the bedrock of trust that we developed in those 7 different hour-long conversations before we jointly decided to move forward. And I also want to be clear as well, before directly answering your question, Pamela, that co-leadership is not for everybody, and that's okay. I have seen, and Pamela and I have talked about, we've seen where sometimes a board of directors will get an idea that co-leadership is the model that they want to do, and they'll just bring 2 people together and say, you know, you 2 would be great together. It really is, it has to be built on that base of trust, and that's not something that can be arranged by other people. It really needs to be something in the leaders themselves, and they have to be committed to that model. And because of that, back to the communication piece, you have to be willing to say, like, we need to talk on the phone now. That said, Pamela and I have weekly check-ins with one another, and we are deeply committed to them. So there are many things that have to move on a leader's calendar, but we always make time to connect one-on-one for an hour. And not only do we have 30 minutes of that hour, which is a grab bag for whatever we need to talk about that we'll both bring to the table, but we also have a structured thing where we go through each week, where we talk about a number of things. We share our top 3 priorities for the week so that we're in the loop on what folks are facing at that moment. We share our external meetings so that, again, we're aware of what's going on, and we're aware of conversations that might be happening, so no leader is caught blindsided in conversation with someone else. And then we also talk through a number of things. We talk about the people on our teams and how things are going on our teams. And my personal favorite is that each week we each share a leadership reflection with one another, and then we also share as a point of accountability for one another whether we're treating ourselves like a human being and how we're doing that week. Because in this movement, we know that there's a lot of bad behavior where people don't take care of themselves and they give so much and people get burned out. We don't want to do that. So that's one of the regular steps of communication. We also have quarterly retreats for our staff. We're an all virtual organization. They were all in person before COVID. And we would always carve out a day in advance to do a co-director retreat, during which time we went through our annual goals for the year and would just do a checkup with both of us running down the list. That also provided a forum, or provides a forum where we're able to have deeper discussions in person about where we're headed and where we're going. And then we also, and I know we'll talk about this more later, but we have other dedicated calls once a week where we focus on building strategic plans. And that is, I think, some of the most fun and amazing work that we've done together. So, Pamela, I'm sure you've got more to say about that, so I'll pass it to you.
Thank you very much. So I will just add, as far as communication goes, that I do think it's important to be committed to open and courageous communication, and really also be committed to receiving communication and in the spirit in which it's given. Because, you know, the work we do is intense. There's always a lot on the line, and we are investing ourselves emotionally and physically in this pursuit of liberation and justice. So along the way, it is super important that that co-leaders don't let themselves as individuals kind of indulge in personalizing and letting things brew and fester, and also that there be a regular discipline of, you know, pausing and reflecting and digesting and not just thinking the worst of people, which, let's keep it real, it can be super hard to kind of set aside experiences. I can't speak for Erin, but I can speak for myself, where you shared something and somebody, took it the wrong way or became resentful that you did it. So it takes a lot of trust and respect to look at your fellow leader and say, I'm going to have a courageous conversation about something, and we're going to discuss it, and then we're going to come to a resolution, and then we're going to set it aside because it's resolved. I can't stress enough how critical that communication is in organizations in general, but absolutely critical to successful co-leadership. And really happy that we were able to maintain and build that across 5 years. And I definitely think every time we have check-ins, and every time we have quarterly co-director meetings, it reinforces that honest communication. Specifically on the strategic plan, that's a huge, absolutely necessary thing, because from our first strategic plan, we have co-written them together using a shared document where we contribute and talk through on conference calls exactly what we're highlighting, why we're doing it, who's responsible for it, and then also how it fits into our overall strategy to achieve our mission. So, that you cannot have areas of that kind of dialogue where you're not sharing your real true thoughts on somebody's suggestion. And you also need to have the courage to give an honest feedback to a suggestion. And I just remember, I don't think I've ever shared this with you, Erin, but I remember I was super committed to getting a good night's sleep before strategic planning calls the first year, because I was like, I want to make sure that I am fresh and I am present and focused, so that I'm paying attention, and I walked the dogs before the call so that they wouldn't interrupt, even though they did. So I think the communication and is in the ability to communicate effectively and respectfully is what fuels the strategic planning process. And I know that a lot of people have different ways of approaching it. I've actually met some people in co-leadership who have one person who takes a first stab at the strategic planning process, and another person then picks it up. But for us, we have always done it in collaboration from step 1 to step 2, and it's ridiculously fun. I absolutely love it. And I think I feel like I'm very grounded in understanding every point of the strategic plan because of that process. Anything you want to add to that, Erin Matson?
Yeah, a little bit. So it is laborious in a good way, because it's exciting to build strategy. We both love to do that. But I would say that the fact that we wrote it out word for word together, and that's the process that we follow with strategic planning, is worth it. Because one of the things where I've seen some co-leaders fall apart is there's distance between them on core matters of strategy, because we write it word for word together and have these deep conversations. In fact, before we even start drafting the plan, we come up with questions. I call them the long walk on the beach talks, and we segment them out. We have those talks. We have staff. Sometimes they'll do research reports on specific things, or report back on aspects of what's happening in the turf that they work in, so we can take those considerations in an informed manner. But because of that alignment, it makes it much easier to be nimble, because as we know in repro, things move really quickly, and it's important to be able to move quickly and to know where our values are, and what our strategy is. It also makes it really easy to say this is in our wheelhouse and this isn't, and it advances our conversations so they happen much more quickly. So I really can't speak more highly about the process. It has certainly worked here at Reproaction. So the next question is, how do we split responsibilities and management roles? And I can start with this, Pamela. So first off, we are devotees of the Management Center. It's a fantastic organization. If you're running a nonprofit, there's no reason not to tap into the great resources that they have. And one of the things that we lifted from the Management Center as a best practice is to have role documents in addition to job descriptions. So job descriptions are what's posted on a website when you're looking to hire someone. A role description is a more functional description of areas of responsibility, and as well as some process notes and expectations. And we do have very clearly defined roles in the organization as co-directors. There are some duties we share. So we both share strategic planning and setting overall vision and strategy and direction for the organization. And we both share public representation duties, whether that's public speaking, working in the media, but we do have a very clear division of responsibilities, some of it based on interest. I still remember, Pamela, one of the first conversations we had before we launched this thing, you were like, I want to do social because I love it so much. And it was like, okay. So some of them were easy like that, where it's like somebody loves it and they did it. And sometimes it just made more sense for things to go together. So I handled administrative things and our relationship with our fiscal sponsor because I also handle development. So that is an overview of how we split our responsibilities in management roles. I don't know, Pamela, if your vision for this part of the conversation is if we talk more directly about what each of us covers, or if there's other things you want to share here.
I think I want to just add, well, I do think it's interesting, the how the communication on a regular basis and weekly check-ins actually allows for us to have, the one co-director making calls. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, when Erin says, that development is something she leads for the organization, and social communication, something that I'm leading. I think it's important that we're having a lot of dialogue and a lot of conversations so that we feel comfortable and confident that our co-director is going to make a call. So we're not checking in on every little step of the way. That wouldn't be efficient, but we also have such an open line of communication that I've always felt like I kind of know where you would land, and when I don't know when you're going to land on something, I always reach out and just confirm it. And I'll say, like, that first year of co-directorship, it was a lot more touching in to see what Erin wanted to know. Then and then once you figure it out, it's like any other relationship where you get to know the person, and you check in and make sure that they were comfortable with how decision making process went. I will share a little bit about how the co-directorship kind of blends into each other, because our national campaign work is drilled down into the grassroots. So I am over the grassroots organizing team, and Erin's team does the campaigns. And so there's always this dialogue about, what are we doing with a national campaign, and how does that drill down into Missouri, or how does that drill down into Virginia? I definitely feel that um, that that is something that's really enhanced our work. And the fact that we have an amazing team of organizers and campaign folks who really know what they're doing and are super creative, but the grassroots organizers like know their turf. So when they're doing fake clinic work, they know how to make that really pop in Milwaukee, or how to make that pop in mid Missouri. So I think there's a natural flow of our work in our campaigns that just naturally gives itself to the way that we've delegated responsibilities. And as Erin said, there's certain things that just make sense, and then there's things that each of us just are really excited to work on. And so those, if I'm tempted to say that things just fell in place, but I know that looking back, I think that we were really deliberate about making sure that there was balance in what each of us are doing, so that one person's not carrying too heavy a load, and also that there's balance in the things that you have to do when you're co-leading an organization, and then the stuff that really is super fun to do.
Awesome. Final question, Pamela. What are your thoughts on finding a co-leader?
That's a good one. I'll circle back to something I said at the beginning, which is that I think it's important to know who you are. I think it's so important to know yourself, and to be honest about yourself, and to be gentle with yourself, but also just to be honest and with yourself, and to do the exploration through whichever channel or mechanism it works for you, to understand your leadership stance, why we're doing this work, and how you want to envision yourself standing in the movement. And then I think that makes it so much easier to be able to receive other people in a spirit that's consistent um, with honoring human rights and dignity and the work that we do, but also to see somebody and be able to really see how or whether co-leadership with that person will make it more effective and efficient to achieve your mission. Because co-leadership for the sake of it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And co-leadership should be something that is really helping to drive the organization. The organization drives the mission. So if we just got along, then it would be great, and it would be a totally different thing. But the fact that we work well together, and that it makes sense and serves a purpose to advance our mission, I think is key. And I don't honestly think I would have seen that those puzzle pieces fitting together if I hadn't invested a lot of time figuring out kind of what am I doing and why am I doing it. I think that was a big part of the timing being so great, that I had done a lot of self-reflection on how I wanted to do this work, and what I didn't like about previous experiences, and what I would have liked to do differently, so that when you and I connected, I was thinking, this is somebody I can see doing those things with me differently in co-leadership. And then I don't think you don't need to find somebody who's like you, but that complements. So, you know, I definitely think that there's value in having people who aren't necessarily have the same skill set or the same or present in leadership the same way, but it does have to complement. I can't imagine oil and water being much fun, and I'm not. We are very committed to low drama, and I'm not a big fan of the chaos theory of management. So I think you have to complement. You have to enjoy working, talking, organizing with somebody, and you have to go through that process to make sure that you're being honest about what makes you enjoy working and organizing with somebody. What do you think?
All of that, Pamela, you nailed it. I agree that the first place to start is actually taking a hard look at yourself as a leader and being brutally honest if the model is right for you. And honestly, and I don't say this casually, if you're a big enough person to pursue leadership in a collaborative space, we live in a hierarchical world. And in particular, white patriarchy teaches us that this idea of power over versus power to or power with. And collective power is a real challenge to the dominant frame that many of us have been raised with and are swimming in. So I think it is this question of is this model right for me? If it is, if one can believes that the work that they do, because this is not merely a job sharing arrangement. I mean, there's benefits to that, right? When like my life has fallen apart at points, Pamela's been able to not only give me a pep talk that I really needed, but step up and support. And I've tried to do that as well when necessary. But this is about a lot more than job sharing. I think, just to respond to some of the questions that commonly come my way about it, it's like this idea that it's less work. In some ways, it's more work. It's definitely more work up front. But there's no question in my mind that in a dynamic co-leadership model, what you get out of it is so much greater than what an individual can put in by themselves. And so I couldn't be prouder of the work that Pamela and I do together. I think it is so much stronger because of this co-leadership model. And directly to the question, though, not just know thyself, I think it's also know the other person. It's important to have those grounding conversations and really get to know them. They're not somebody that you need to know from years back. That's not the background that Pamela and I had with one another, although I certainly really respected her and had a vibe that we saw a number of things in similar ways, and that also that she would bring challenges to the table that would help me grow my own thinking. But having that sense of like, is this a person similarly who is suited for co-leadership? Sometimes people say they might be, right? But are they someone who works well with others? Are they open to feedback? Are they committed to clear and direct communication, to respect? Do they share your values in terms of basic values like, workaholism or commitment to joy or self-care, or at least accountability if you're not doing self-care? So I think those are really important things. And I think also, Pamela, we're right about at the time of where we wanted to move next. So I'll just pass it back to you if there's anything more you wanted to say before I move us along.
Nope, that's a great stopping point, and let's move on into next steps.
Great. Okay, so just want to encourage y'all to plug into our hard-hitting work that we do at Reproaction. You can sign up for alerts at www.reproaction.org. We do these Act and Learn webinars every month. They're free and open to the public. Sometimes we dive in deep on topics. So last month we were talking about racism in anti-abortion paid clinics. Sometimes we talk about things like this, where what's working, what's not, organizing models, things of that nature. If you sign up for our list, you will never miss an invite. We're not exclusive about it. They're open to the public. We want you to come. We want you to be informed. So please sign up. And then follow us on social media. We're Reproaction on Facebook, Twitter, and the Gram. And then please save the date for our next Act and Learn webinar in January 2021, which can't come soon enough. Tuesday, January 12th at 3 p.m. Eastern. Our next topic next month will be spreading a pandemic, big pro-life in action. There has been trouble in River City and around the nation, y'all. So with that, I will pass it back to Pamela to lead us through Q&A.
Thank you very much. So we have lots of questions. Try to get through as many of them as possible. There's a couple of questions in here about whether we would be willing to share the questions that we asked each other when we were trying to come to the decision of whether to be in co-leadership together. And Erin, what are your thoughts? I can't even promise that I can dig them up at this point.
So, to be honest, and I ask for grace from people on the line, Pamela, I'm about to say to take us off the rails here. We can't see your face, just your profile picture.
Go for it, Erin.
I was frantically looking for the document, and I'm actually just going to pull it up right now and hope that nothing goes wrong.
I love it. Oh, this is so awesome.
But I saw esteemed colleagues asking for it, and I do want to share it with y'all as a public service. So
he's gone.
There they are. So here's what we talked through, and we took as much time as we needed to get through them. That's why it was 7-hour-long calls. We didn't have them segmented out for the call. We talked in what we needed to, but we talked about the project itself, what became Reproaction. What are your dreams? What are your personal goals? Are you comfortable with the current incipient vision for the project? What, if anything, would you change? What are we unwilling to change? And each person would answer these, and we would have dialogue back and forth. We really needed to understand where one another was coming from. We talked about next steps, how we'd want to describe the external culture we'd want what became Reproaction to create. 3 words to describe the internal working culture and the values we wanted to instill in our organizers. Then we had some getting to know one another questions. I won't read through them all because they're on the screen, but I want to highlight how valuable it was, like, to get past the resume stuff of question 1 of the professional and activist experience, which is important. Actually, you learn a lot through doing and what someone has done, but to have those questions up front, to be like, oh my gosh, I failed at this. It was awful. And here's what I learned. To talk about what we really sucked at and what our weaknesses are, in addition to things like our working style. So the things that, both the positive questions that might be asked on interviews, but also really digging deep past that and having some brutal honesty about ourselves and what we've learned. Having a lot of dedicated time on what it meant to work together. I want to lift up this question that I still smile about. How will you help me succeed? What can I do to help you succeed?
Mm-hmm.
And then sticky questions as well. So any conflict of interest or no compete issues. Talking about pay. These were really critical questions that I want to strongly advise that anyone who considers going into this model talks about up front. If you don't, you do so at the peril of the mission that you're pursuing. How will we handle disagreements between the 2 of us? What happens if one of us leaves? And can any of us be fired, by whom and for what reasons? You want to believe that things are going to go well. They certainly have here. But you also want to have that. And then finally, just for fun, Pamela, I'm going to scroll down. Dun, 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 dun. We did a hypothetical exercise, and I just want to share this with you all, and I'm smiling and beaming, but I hunger to have the problems that we had under the Obama administration again. That was the time that we were launching the movement, was stuck in a defensive crouch, and there actually were a number of problems and new restrictions being put forward, oftentimes positioned as compromises that the movement was bizarrely cheerleading, even though it was setting things back. So I just also have a hypothetical problem to talk to really talk through, to think through, how do we really work together and put all these values into action. So I hope y'all enjoyed that trip down memory lane. I know I sure did.
That is so awesome. And I'm so glad you were able to find that. That is so, oh my God. Oh, 2015. Okay, so thank you, Erin. And the next question is just to share a little bit more about the multiracial co-leadership dynamic, and what's hard, what's valuable, what's different. So I'll take a first stab at that. Thank you for the question. I definitely feel that a lot of folks had been dodging the conflict and tension between where the mainstream movement and historically white-led reproductive justice or reproductive rights organizations, rather, and how voiceless a lot of Black women and people of color had felt within those spaces. And keep in mind, this is 2015, and a lot has changed, but a lot hasn't. And one of the things that I was deeply committed to was not being a part of that problem, and also understanding that if it were an easy problem to unwrap, it probably would have been done already. So having come from a more mainstream organization background, I had definitely great respect for individuals and the work that was done, but also was mindful of a structure where, folks were avoiding hard questions and were trying to fix some things that needed to be dismantled. And we're trying to dismantle some things that needed to be fixed. So having an opportunity to found an organization is both exciting and daunting, because then you're like, okay, so you do it. And so I'm happy to say that I think we were very mindful of the fact that we both were walking into something that there weren't a ton of examples of, but at the same time, we both feel very strongly that it's important that there be this place where folks in leadership are having open conversations about racism within progressive spaces, about what when people can stand up and when people need to step back. What does it look like? What does it feel like to center marginalized communities? And also, how do we move from critique of what white led organizations are doing and what white people are doing, and what needs to be done? How do we move from that to change, and what is it, what does that look like, and how do we model some behavior so that folks can wrap their head around it, rather than I think we all too often get comfortable throwing around terms rather than guidance. So I really felt challenged and excited, and I definitely feel that we leaned into that tension with with the understanding that, you know, we came together during a time of tremendous um, uh, pain and violence against Black people, you know, the murder of Black individuals by the state, the a reckoning that we were stalking towards on, you know, racism and discrimination within progressive spaces, and that we were going to have to navigate that in co-leadership. And so, you know, I obviously feel that uh, that what was hard about that is that a lot of that stuff happened within Reproaction, and you know, I guess if Erin and I ever want to write a book, but there were so many moments where we were in dialogue with each other about something that was happening in the world, whether it was, you know, the protests against, you know, state violence or immigration violations, where we were in dialogue with each other. And because we were in dialogue as who we are, with our experiences, that what we were coming up with, I just felt was very, very different and coming from a different informed experience. I feel that that's incredibly valuable, even though people might not have seen us making that sausage. That a lot of the things that are forward facing from our organization come from a place of deep research and dialogue that is very I'll use the word very diverse in thought, but people are coming from a lot of really um, a lot of perspectives, environments, and backgrounds that aren't often represented in the mainstream movement at the table. And I'll say what's different is, you know, I have always been, as Erin said, a very plain spoken person, but it's very different for me to be able to honestly voice how I feel about something that I feel is advancing white supremacy within progressive spaces, and be in co-leadership with somebody who will listen to that and who will absorb that and not try to defend it. And it shouldn't be such an exception to the rule, but it's been an exceptional experience in my experience.
Thank you for that, Pamela. I will say that I have long said I love the radical work that we do at Reproaction. It is radical, deeply radical, whether it's getting out the word about self-managed abortion with pills, to confronting the left directly when they're minimizing and shaming abortion, to so many things. That said, I believe that maybe the most radical thing that Pamela and I have done together is to lead this organization in this movement in a multiracial partnership, because it is so rare in this movement. I cannot think of another example like this. I think it's really critical that folks know that multiracial leadership is possible and it can work, but it requires clear, open communication, and especially, and I'm speaking directly to white people who may be listening right now in my capacity as a white person, that it requires a lot of willingness to sit and to sit with white supremacy and how it shows up in your own life, how it shows up in your leadership, how it shows up in your organization and everywhere, and really take it on fully, and honestly to be very deliberate about how to approach it within a session. So one thing that we didn't mention is Pamela and I also at one point worked with an executive coach together to advance our co-leadership. And we did have some intentional conversations about our multiracial partnership and what we can do to expand the imprint of that, because we do think it's so important, not just for repro movements, but for the progressive movement writ large, that this is something that's really important to show that these partnerships can work and to support others who are interested in doing them, because I do believe very strongly it's part of how we win. And one of the things that I remember sharing in that session that I had purposefully been cloaking, and I'm saying it here specifically if there are other white people considering this model on the call, that I expend an effort to shield Pamela from my own white lady guilt. And if you don't have white lady guilt and you're a white lady, then I have serious questions about what you're doing in this movement. I would say I may have a double dose of it, having been raised Catholic, so I've got all of it going on. But really be deliberate about what kind of oxygen, if you're a white person, one of these partnerships, what oxygen you're taking, but also more importantly, what oxygen you're creating.
Thank you very much for that. And this was fun, Erin. I enjoyed it. And I'm about to go and have a Werther's candy because that's the official candy of Reproaction. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We hope that you have a wonderful December, and we'll see you back for the January Act and Learn webinar. Thank you so much.